Hello and welcome to A Path Through, my YouTube channel and Substack of the same name. Today I'm going to be reading aloud on how we got here and inoculating against it, my second essay in the series, describing exactly what historical and philosophical and ideological conditions have brought us to our current state of affairs in the United States and the West in general, and what we might begin doing about it. And I'll offer some commentary and such. This essay was first published several months ago, so there's probably some updates to be made. History is sentient, driving forward toward the end of time with a purpose. It has a will, and it is fated. The question of the utopian age's rise is that of when, and not if. On this precipice, the end of suffering is in sight. There will be no war, nor famine. There will be no pain. The only labor to be expended is in the ethereal creative realm, and only then at one's leisure. You will want for nothing, as the spirit of the utopian age rises as a deity manifest by the perfect knowledge of itself and the harmony of mankind. The absolute spirit will arrive as written only when the contradictions of society are resolved. The utopian age is the natural state of mankind, and not for the incessant introduction of contradiction into the culture we would already be free of all oppressive forces. These contradictions can only be resolved through the actions, doing the work, of the philosophical, ideological, and political left. The actions of the reactionaries, the right, can only serve to delay the immanentization of the eschaton, i.e., to bring about the end of history and the absolute spirit. And the reactionaries must be stopped at any cost to expedite the beginning of the end, year zero. What I've just read to you is literally the religious origin of the American political left as it currently exists. It is also the origin of the political movements known as communism, Marxism, fascism, progressivism, and now wokeism. The religion is scientism, and we are in the way. The fundamental political nature of this religion is that all of mankind must be brought into agreement in both word and deed, reading from the same sheet of music at the same time, and, ultimately, all of humanity must act as a single organism to achieve the goal. In practice, during the 20th century, this led to the horrors of struggle sessions in Mao's China, the re-educational gulags of the Soviets, the killing fields of Cambodia, and the progressive doctrine of forced sterilization and abortion of undesirables in the United States. Yes, we did that. This doctrine of scientism is a perversion of the tenets of Christianity and a treacherous deceit. Man rightly infers the imposition of this fallen world on himself as an aberration, having been created to reside among perfection, but without recognizing nature itself as corrupted by sin, he is foolishly susceptible to the lie that he might recreate perfection on earth. This is a return to Eden ideology devoid of the grace of God and the redemption of Jesus Christ. It is man assuming he, or perhaps nature, is Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the authors of year zero. Biblically, it is yet another instance of man believing himself equal to God, as Adam and Eve with their forbidden fruit, or the Babylonian spiteful architecture, and our disobedience. It is a story of ideologically induced narcissism resulting in psychopathy, as each misstep toward utopia introduces impossibilities that scale logarithmically toward hell. Just to give you a bit of background, this religion was that of German philosopher Hegel, a man who hated Christian influence on German or Prussian culture and wanted to drive it out through the creation of what he called a Volkisch, religion that he based largely in alchemy, as he was an alchemist. However, the situation is complicated in that most of today's leftists would not claim to ascribe to religion of scientism as described above. And most have probably never heard of these concepts. So why then do they continuously forward the resultant political doctrines and act very much as previously devout adherents to scientism acted? We will explore this topic from several angles and, with luck, we will extract a vaccine to this mimetic virus. Over the course of 100 years, the extremely potent and extremely religious ideas of progressivism have adapted and changed. As a consequence of their introduction into the multi-heritage melting pot of America, these ideas were adapted in ways to American traditionalism, and in ways American traditionalism was adapted to them. The latter was made far more potent through the subversive mechanisms of political warfare developed and implemented by the Frankfurt School theorists, a group of German communists who fled Frankfurt for New York as Hitler was ascendant. The subversive weapons of the Marxists were directed squarely at organized religion, and in particular Christianity. However, and is one of the most ironic of all things to come, just as these Marxist socio-political weapons have effectively severed large portions of Christendom and Judaism from doctrinal text and foundational truth, it too has separated progressivism from the foundations of scientism. Nary a progressive has even heard of Hegel, let alone read his Phenomenology of Spirit, scientism's holy book, and a great many, probably the overwhelming majority, fancy themselves atheists or humanists. Yet just as America continues to be a country of Christian tradition, for the moment, despite those grounded in doctrine being a minority, so does scientism persist through tradition within progressivism. Again, this mechanism was made far more potent by the work of the Frankfurt Marxists through the means of political warfare. The Marxists explicitly targeted the means of cultural transmission, the church, media, education, government, and so on, for subversion through the infiltration of critical theorists who would, over time, create a counter-hegemony from which to attack and conquer from within. The long march to the institutions actually started in the 1930s, and testimony from the 1950s implicated more than 100 high-ranking communists in the Catholic Church alone. In a way, it was a method of the German colonization of America. Enjoy that lemon, wokus. The woke often talk of potentialities of being and ways of knowing, and other purposely abstruse phraseology to obfuscate their ridiculous philosophy in terms of objectivity. This is, however, a case of them turning their weakness into strength. They hide their ideas in exorbitantly academic language in order to hide what would otherwise be readily apparent. Their ideas are not in accordance with reality. It is reality which constrains our potentialities of being and ways of knowing. We cannot do whatever we desire, for while there are relatively few ways to live, and even fewer to prosper, there are infinite ways to suffer and die. It is reality that is the ultimate oppressor. It is therefore reality that must form the basis for inoculation against wokeism. As discussed in my introductory essay, A Call to Action and an Appeal to Heaven, which I've also read on this channel, our individual psychology is organized around our culture and our beliefs. However, at this point, the overwhelming majority of Americans have experienced some degree of indoctrination into scientism, or progressivism, as a consequence of a century of subversion. So, I would like to ask you to participate in a brief thought experiment. Consider the case of a family of 4 visiting a tropical beach on vacation and visualize as I read it. The parents are in their 30s, the children 5 and 11. They are a typical family. Both parents work, the children attend daycare and middle school, respectively. This is the first vacation they've had since their second child was born. As the mother swims in the ocean, the father and the children sit on the beach making sandcastles. People around them on the beach start panicking, and as the father looks up, he sees the water has rapidly receded by several hundred yards, and it has swept his wife out with it. The father, though immediately grief-stricken, realizes that a tsunami is imminent, and he begins to run his children to higher ground. As the first wave approaches, the father realizes he cannot make it to the hotel, and so he lifts the children into a sturdy tree. Before he can climb up himself, he is struck by the wave, and large debris take him under. Though both parents are lost, both children survive. I now ask that you take a moment to honestly analyze your responses, both emotional and reasoned, to this thought experiment. Did you, at any point, experience anger? With such things as raw, unscripted emotion, nearly any response is conceivable, but these responses should always be examined against reason, and that reason informed by reality. If you experienced anger, I'd ask you to spend some time considering what exactly the anger was in response to. This was a story of tragedy. However, there was nobody to blame for what happened, and anger at nature or its God is the seed of rebellion. If your anger cannot be dismissed as unwarranted, unhelpful, or at least consciously tempered in this situation, I would speculate that you hold some significant degree of indoctrination into utopian ideology. If you found yourself contemplating the class or the race of the family, or found disappointment in learning that the family was nuclear, I'd suggest you desperately need to remove yourself from wokeism and seek traditional values and grounding. If you fail to sympathize at all due to any perception of privilege in the family, you may be at the logical endpoint of indoctrination that leads to genocide. We must strive to recognize, both consciously and through our values, that the natural state of man is not utopian. The natural state of man, as informed by history, is pain, privation, hunger, disease, subjugation, and constant struggle to meet the most basic needs. This is borne out in every civilization to have ever existed, and it is always exacerbated in the twilight of civilizations. That every single one of us hasn't had our own tsunami moment in this life is testament to the singular greatness of our civilization in creating the freest, most prosperous, and least subject to nature existence since the fall. Perhaps it is this that makes us uniquely weak against the current threat. In such a time, it is entirely understandable how people could wrongly assume that there's enough of everything for everybody. After all, when your meat comes in our minds not from a cow nor bird, but from the market, we are detached such that the consequence of everything natural in this world seems, at worst, an inconvenience. Our technology is advanced beyond the point of understanding of most, thereby lending credibility to the possibility of all forms of magic, even that which defies logic, even alchemy. This confluence of circumstances and purposely driven theocratic tyranny of scientismists, the constant, ruthless criticisms of all things by the woke, has resulted in what I call the utopian mindset. In this mind, all things are seen through the narrative, or lens, that events, circumstances, happenings, decisions, and judgments are to be made against the world as it should exist, as that of Eden, instead of against a harsh, true, and objective reality. This mindset produces almost exclusively ideas, plans, and paths, ways of being, that cannot survive contact with reality. So now, for them, it is reality that must change. But reality doesn't change. Reality eventually reasserts itself. The only question is how many lives it claims when it does. We must adopt a reality-based mindset. We must temper our anger and our dissatisfaction with creation and find some comfort that we are, each of us, subject to nature and nature's God. We must trade our greed for contentedness in what we have and what we might come to have. We must exchange envy for empathy in finding common cause with our fellow Americans and seek joy in their successes. We must abandon zero-sum concepts of the rat race. A part of this mindset must be to recognize the circumstances that we are now in objectively. We do not inhabit a time of normal partisan politics. Now is a time of political warfare. Make no mistake, political warfare is warfare. The objective is to subjugate a population, us, to a political will, theirs. This is not being accomplished through voting, though I'd argue that a vote for tyranny is little more legitimate. It is being accomplished through revolution. The rules have changed. As Leon Trotsky put it, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. To call for détente at this stage is like pushing the breacher aside to knock gingerly on the door. You'll be lucky if there's a metacandy, and you've lost the initiative. Libertarianism, conservatism, classical liberalism, and so on are all worthy and desirable as destinations. We are, however, on the perilous freeway of resistance to tyranny. We must act like we are at war. This does not yet mean grab your boots, fatigues, and rifle and assemble in the square for inspection. It does, however, mean that in the currently contested spheres of warfare, information, politics, and so on, the rules of war and not of ordinary law now apply. There is no more non-aggression principle in these realms. There is no principle whatsoever on which to stand to argue against the dissolution, breaking up, seizure, or punishment of corporations that have entered into this war against us. There is no principle that individual states should impose or allow for the imposition of federal diktat within their borders. There is no principle that states should not form allegiances outside of federalism. No such principles exist because the other side has already violated these norms, and our adherence represents only unilateral disarmament and surrender in the face of an enemy that will not stop until we are dead. One day we might reimpose peace and harmony within normal civil order, but first we must win. Until then, we must struggle mightily against the tide for as long as we have breath. The goodness and prosperity we can still see remnants of did not come about by accident, nor by the deterministic march of the universe. Our ancestors made this for us. Let us keep it. Thank you for joining us for this read-through of On How We Got Here and Inoculating Against It, a essay I wrote several months ago on how things came to be this way in America, the problems that arose through the 18 and 1900s, the early progressive movement, the Hegelianism, the Marxism, the communism, and the revolution that we now are experiencing. I look forward to you coming back for the next episode.